Dr. Teresa Pelkie. Welcome to our class.
In today's class, we will continue and finish Tutorial 1. Okay, the address tag is covered in this tutorial. It is a block level element. It contains some meaning. It is used to enclose content. Therefore, it is a logical or semantic tag. Although it does have a display, it display the content as italicized. So here we see an example of using the address tag and how it would render in the browser. The Blockquote tag is a block level element. Again, it is logical or semantical because it is used to represent a section that is quoted. It does have a physical display component in that it indents or has a margin from the right and left of the page. And here you see an example of a block quote being used, and below how it would render in the browser. The block quote has a site attribute which identifies where the quotation is taken from. The pre-tag, which I believe stands for preserve space, you might hear it identified as the pre-format tag, allows you to type in content and it will preserve the spacing so that what you type in is actually what you see. In order to do that, it would render the font as a monospaced font. And here is an example of the pre-tag where it preserves the white space, and what you see is actually what you get. We will also look at lists in this tutorial. The ordered list is a numbering system. We see the opening and closing OL tag. Remember I said that tags, two-sided tags contain either content or other tags. For every item that we want, every marker, we need an opening LI and a closing LI tag. So the OL tag by default will give us decimal numbering. Should we want to change the marker, we will use style sheets. So I have the style attribute calling the list style type property, setting it to the value of upper alpha. So we have 6 different values for the list style type property, one of them being none. So if I were to test this code in the browser, this is how it would render as an upper alpha character. And here again, an ordered list has to do with a logical numbering ordering system. The unordered list, which is represented by the UL tag, follows the same basic syntax. It uses the LI tag to put the item on the page. The default marker is a bullet, which the type of is actually called the disc, D-I-S-C. So here we have the UL tag. If we wanted to change the list style, we would do that using style sheets. So from the style attribute, we would call the list style type property, and we have 3 values that we can set that to circle, disc, and square. So if we were to change the list style type property to circle, this is how this code would render in the browser. We can substitute an image for the marker, and that is being called by using the list style image CSS property, and the value would be the actual name of the graphic file. So here we have an example of what the code would look like and how it would render in the browser. I would like to bring out to your attention the type attribute, which has been deprecated as of XHTML. It's to use the type attribute to change the marker type for both the UL and the OL list. That has since been deprecated in favor of using style sheets. The definition list contains 3 HTML tags, the opening and closing DL tag, the opening and closing DT tag, which would represent essentially like a term, the opening and closing DD tag, which would represent the definition. The definition list would render itself. You don't see these used that often, but it does make for a nice type of presentation depending on your content. The image tag is a one-sided tag, therefore it is empty, and we see that in with our XHTML syntax, we needed to put the /. In HTML5, we are going back to the way it was, so that / is no longer needed. The image tag requires 2 attributes, and these are HTML attributes. The source attribute, which indicates the name of the graphic, so you have an electronic file. The alt attribute, which gives you a description of the graphic in the event that the graphic may not load. You can find out more about accessibility guidelines in our Appendix D and at these 2 URLs. So the alt attribute is very important for accessibility. And I would also like to point out that the permitted graphic file extensions in HTML are JPG, GIF, and PNG. So we're looking at JPEGs, GIFs, and PNGs. In order to center a graphic, we need to use style sheets. So we will use the style attribute to call the text align property and set that value to center. So we can use any tag, a paragraph tag, a div tag, a heading tag should the image be inside the heading. We cannot call this property and value from inside the image tag. It just doesn't work that way. The align attribute used to be used for centering, and I will point that out again. This is deprecated in XHTML and in HTML5. The horizontal line or horizontal rule is another one-sided element. And here again it is one-sided and empty, and in XHTML we needed to terminate that with a /. Today we do not need to do that for HTML5. It creates a horizontal line on the page which is used to separate content or to define some type of change in the flow of the HTML document. If you want to add additional characteristics to the horizontal rule, you must do so using style sheets. There is a width property, a height property, and both a color and background color property. We need to use both of these properties because some browsers recognize color, some browsers recognize background color. So this is an example of cross-browser coding where we need to use 2 properties because some browsers will use one, some browsers will use another. Another quirk, so to speak, is that in order to see the color of a line, in some browsers the width must be at least 3 pixels or more. I will talk about these different units of measurements in another class. The horizontal rule by default centers itself in the page, so if the width was set at 50%, it will go halfway across the page. I would like to point out a little bit about the inline CSS syntax that we saw in the previous example. So when we call CSS from inside any HTML element, we're calling it with a style attribute, that is an HTML attribute, and it is calling a CSS property set to a CSS value. If you're only calling one property and value, that ending semicolon is optional, but you may call multiple properties and values. You can call as many as you want, and they must be separated by a semicolon. The space in between the property and value after the semicolon, after the colon, is optional. I prefer putting it there because I think it helps see the code a little bit easier. The horizontal rule did have several HTML attributes, and here again they are deprecated in favor of using style sheets. You may still see them in some older web pages. Special characters. We have special characters in Microsoft Word also. These are characters that do not exist on the keyboard, so they need to be inserted using certain special code. In the HTML document, there are two ways that we can do this, either using what is called a numeric character reference or a character entity reference. And we have a list of special characters in our text. You can find more also on the web.